Okay, good morning, everybody. How are you doing today? Good? Did you have a good break? Yeah? Did anyone do anything exciting? No? Nothing? Okay. Study. Hey, that's what I like to hear. So, what we're going to be doing now is moving on to the second half of Unit 2. We start with economic development and growth. And so I know that because you've been on break, you might be a little rusty. So I wanted to start with a sort of informal quiz. If I can get this thing to work. I said present. Press the present button. And this is less dramatic if it doesn't work. What I just passed out to you are these little clickers. I assume everyone has one. You good? Yes. So has anyone ever used these before? No. This is going to happen, assuming I get this computer to work. If not, I'll just collect them and it'll just be a disaster. But if I can get this thing to work, I hit the present button. We'll see what happens. I'm going to put up a question on the screen, and then you will select using your clicker what you think is the answer. These are questions I don't expect you to know. This isn't something that we've talked about before. I'm just trying to establish a baseline understanding of where you sit when you think about the world. Present. This turns right off. That's working. That's working? Oh, there we go. Awesome. Touch and go there for a moment. Let's hit those lights. So these questions, by the way, come from this book, Factfulness, or wondering why it's called the Factfulness Quiz. These are coming from this particular book. And these are just questions about the current state of the world. We now should establish a baseline if we're going to talk about economic development. So, again, you just select which one. If you change your mind and you move to a different one, that's totally fine. It will move your answer. By the way, if you want to, it should receive your signal no matter where you're pointing it. But if you want to kind of like feel like you have to point at something, don't point at the screen. It's just a screen. There's nothing here. If you want to point at anything, point over here. You see this little thing sticking out. This is the receiver. But again, you should be able to point at your own head. It should be fine. So with that in mind, let me ask you this. In all low-income countries in the world today, how many girls do you think finish primary school? Let's move this out of the way. My responses. I don't know why it's stuck in the middle here. Let's put that over there.
Just press the letter.
What? So this is how many girls finish primary school? And we're going to put the answers here. Oops. That marker doesn't work very well. So we have girls, primary. And it is 20%, 40%, 60%. Don't talk to each other. Don't look it up. Just give your best guess. What do you think the right answer is? Okay, and I got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 23 of you. It looks like I have roughly that. It's hard to tell. They had some sort of weird formatting issue. I was like, I got 20. I'll take it. I don't know why it's so small. But we have, looks like 60% are saying that. And what is that? Is that 35? 35 and 5. Okay. Another question. I got 6 of them for you. Here's another one. Where does the majority of the world population live? Does they live in low-income countries, in middle-income countries, or in high-income countries? Where do you think most of the world lives? So just don't talk about it. Just give your best guess. I want to know what your gut instinct is. I want to know what your impression is about the world. People live in low, mid, or high income countries. Looks like that's a 23, so I'll go for it. Again, it made it really tiny. 3863. Doesn't add up to 100 due to roundings. Okay, in the last 200 years, the proportion of the world population living in extreme poverty has almost doubled, remained about the same, or halved.
Or 200.
What do you mean?
The question.
Less 20 years. Did I say 200?
Yeah.
Less 20 years, sorry. Less 20 years, the proportion of the world population. I guess that should be closer to 30 years. Because this is when was this published? Yeah, it was published in 2018. So if you want to make it 25 years, 30 years, not 200. 3, 2, 1. So 50, 25, 25. Okay. 2 more questions. What is the life expectancy of the world today? Is it about 50 years, 60 years, or 70 years? Best guess. Four, 50, 46. Very pessimistic person. 4. We have 50 and we have 46%. Okay. How did the number of deaths per year from natural disasters change over the last 100 years? Is it less than half? Is it the same? Or is it doubled? So this is deaths from natural disasters. Okay. 35, 22, 43. 35, 22, 43. Last question. Last question. Worldwide, 30-year-old men spend about 10 years in school on average. How many years have women of the same age spent in school? You got 9 years, 6 years, or 3 years? Gee, I wonder where the majority of people are. 9%, 9%, and then 83%. Okay. How confident are you of your answers? Well, pretty confident. Pretty confident. Let's see how you did. Now, there's only one answer for each of these. And by the way, we have very good data on these. There's only one answer for each of these, or one right answer. So I generally go with if most people got it wrong, then you're wrong. So it's not enough to be the most popular answer. It also has to be the majority answer. Okay. Here are the answers. 60% of girls finish primary school. Wrong. You were totally wrong, right? Only 5% got that right. Sorry, it should be 60%. I was writing too quickly. Thank you. Most people live in middle-income countries, so you got that one right. That's great. About the world, the portion of the world living in extreme poverty has almost halved. That was the correct answer. You got that one wrong. The world expectancy is 70 years. Close. You almost got it right, but you got it wrong. The number of deaths due to natural disasters is half. Remember, you hear about the natural disasters, but we've gotten a lot better at keeping people alive. Early warning systems, better technology. Plus, like when population grows, like if there's a natural disaster where nobody is, nobody talks about it. If there's a natural disaster, people are, that's when you talk about it. So that was wrong. And also, 30-year woman has spent an average of 9 years in school. 9 years in school. So not exactly like men, but pretty darn close. So how'd you do? You did really bad. You did worse than a chimpanzee. You did worse than... Why do I say you did worse than a chimpanzee? Yeah.
Because if they were just guessing, they would have had a 1 in 3 chance of getting them right.
Yeah, so how many would you expect to have gotten right if you're just guessing one?
2 out of 6.
2 out of 6, right? You would expect you would get 2. How many did you get right? 1. You got 1. Right. And it was actually majority too, right? So sometimes people get this right, but it's like there's a plurality. It's not a majority. So, but you still did worse than chimpanzees. Don't feel too bad. This quiz, a longer version of this quiz, has been given to people who are supposedly experts in their field. They still do badly. Right. People who work in world health, for example, they still do badly. Let's see if I could. Do I have something? I think I highlighted in this book. Let's see here. Over the past decades, I have posed hundreds of fact questions like these about poverty and wealth, population growth, births, deaths, education, health, gender, violence, energy, and the environment, basic global patterns and trends to thousands of people across the world. The tests are not complicated. There are no trick questions. I am careful to only use facts that are well documented and not disputed, yet most people do extremely badly. This, by the way, is written by Hans Rosling, who is, or was, Professor of Global Health. He died some years ago. Very sad. It's an excellent book. I recommend it. What else is going on? Why are you so pessimistic about the world? One. Tell me what's... Only you can really answer this. I don't know what's going on, but only you can really answer. Why are you so pessimistic? Anyone? Just because you made a slight movement, so I'm going to focus on you.
Probably something to do with like news and the media that people take having an effect on how people view the world.
So you want to elaborate a little bit on that? Why it's the news?
I mean, I guess you just get people's attention is to put something that has like a high shock value. People typically see like 1 million people died in a same car crash on a 80-lane highway or something extreme, and it's that kind of people focus on and gravitate towards memory and that kind of stuff.
It's like the airplane stuff.
Yeah.
Like, what do I mean by that?
Like, I saw a thing saying like not that many airplanes are actually crashing. They're publicizing it more, so now everyone's scared to get on a plane because.
Yeah. Like, what's the most dangerous thing people do every day?
Drive a car.
Drive a car. In fact, there was some work done about 9/11, and they say more people died because of 9/11 after 9/11 than on the day itself. And what that meant is 9/11 really scared people from flying. And so if you do not fly, what do? You drive. And so people will then get into car accidents and die. Right? Because they chose to drive rather than fly. Right? And so and those accidents are not covered. Right? The dramatic big explosions, right? The thing that happened, even when no one actually dies, like when that panel blew off last year, tons of news coverage. You all know exactly what I'm talking about, don't you? The Boeing. Like, no one actually died in that. It was just scary and weird. So we have to be smart when we're thinking about the state of the world. We want to rely on the facts. And so what we're going to be doing today is talking a little bit about those facts, getting a sense of the promise of economic development and where it comes from. For one, in order to sort of get away from that, we are not going to think in terms of rich and poor anymore. I don't want you thinking in terms of rich countries and poor countries. That's a useful shorthand in some cases. It's not actually the best way to think about it. Because the one question you got right is this one. What does this mean? Most people live in mid-income. What does that mean, middle-income countries? Show your shoulders. What do you mean?
Because I think that depends on what counts as
Sure. Okay. Well, how do you count as middle-income? More than half of you got this question right, so we have an idea. Yeah.
I guess like you have enough money to like provide for basic needs,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe you don't have a ability to maybe leisure things or just things that are above your basic needs.
Yeah. So better than it used to be. There's like a. In fact, I think. So Hans Rosling is big on the think in different terms of different levels. So we have level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. And this categorization is, I think last I checked, it was adopted by the World Bank. This isn't just some random academic saying this stuff. This is something that has meaningful explanatory power. And when we think level 1, we think in terms of low-income countries. When we think of level 4, we think in terms of rich countries, high-income countries. But there's also going to be but there's also going to be a low middle tier and a high middle tier. How many people are in the world? It's about roughly did you say 8 people? 8 people. Yeah, 8 billion. Roughly 1 billion live here. Roughly 1 billion live here. So we have 1 billion on the edge over here, 1 billion on the bottom part right here. We got about 3 billion in the lower middle and 3 billion in the upper middle. In other words, the great bulk, 75% of humanity roughly, lives in these middle income countries. In fact, I sort of want to. I'm actually going to bring this down here. I'm doing the thing that I swore I wouldn't do, which is bring this up and down, because it takes up time and it's annoying. But it's worth it. So Hans Rosling also is known for making this thing called a Gapminder, which gives you easy access to lots of information that's published, but it's always, it's annoying to look at. So it's kind of a bridge. It takes care of the gap between the raw data and something the public can actually consume. So here's the data. It's all pretty. It's all nice to see. We have GDP per capita adjusted for purchasing power on the bottom here. And then on the vertical axis, we have life expectancy. I have lots of lights I can switch on. And what I can do, you can see across the top, we have the income levels. So there's about 1 billion people here, about 3 billion here, there's India. About 3 billion here, there's China. And about 1 billion right here. And the size of the bubble corresponds to the population. And so you can guess What that big green bubble is right there in the level 4,
US.
US, right? The color indicates the region of the world. Here we have Russia. I've mentioned China. There's Brazil, India, Nigeria, and so forth. But there used to be a time when a lot more people were poor. We can also bring it back to the 1800s. Everyone was poor in the 1800s. Some were obviously richer than others, but everyone was poor by our standards in the 1800s. And if I hit that play button, you can see the world begin to change. The life expectancy is kind of, we're getting some slow movement here on GDP. And as we move forward here, you can see the, I guess I missed the drop for Civil War, but you see this rise, you're going to see a drop for World War I. There it goes. And then you're going to see lots more economic growth and life expectancy except World War II, there it was, and then rise. And you see that there's huge chunks of the world that were stuck in these very poor areas, the rich and the poor. But over the 80s and 90s and 2000s, they have rocketed forward. This is why when we say that global poverty, extreme poverty, has more than halved, this is why. And now we have a completely different world. Not rich and poor, but a lot of nuance here. We don't want to skip over the progress that people have experienced over the past 30, 50, 100 years. If we are going to summarize the ideas of the current state of the world, we have to keep in mind 2 important facts. Fact 1. The world is getting richer. I know there's a lot of reasons to be pessimistic. The news covers it. The news gives you lots of reasons to be pessimistic. But if you don't look at the data, if you only rely on the news, then you think that flying is more dangerous than driving, and the opposite is true. You have to look at the data, and the data makes it clear the world is getting richer. But we also have this conflicting point. The world is still poor. Poor by modern standards, poor by level 4 country standards. It's true that not a lot of fewer people are over here, but it's not like everyone's over here in level 4. The patient is sick, but getting better. These are 2 seemingly contradictory ideas, but they're not. We've made a lot of progress, but there's still a lot of progress to be made. And so these dual ideas, I hope that you keep in mind as we move forward with how we get there. Does anyone have any questions? Great. So we're going to divvy this up into good news and not so good news. I think I need this. Oh, I think that works. Everyone can grow. As we will discuss, we do not want to assume that economic growth requires that you steal from somebody else. That's not true. Economic growth can be what we call endogenous. Anyone know what the term endogenous means? What kind of skeleton do insects have?
Exoskeleton.
And the exoskeleton, what does exo mean?
Outside of it.
Outside. So what kind of skeleton do you have?
Endoskeleton.
An endoskeleton. Because endo means
Internal.
inside, right? Internal. When we talk about endogenous growth, we're talking about growth that comes from within the country. Like the source of growth is not something that they had to rely on. It wasn't some God giving them manna from heaven. It wasn't them taking it from somebody else. It was them developing their own economy and making it more efficient. That's where growth comes from. In other words, growth is not a zero-sum game. A zero-sum game means in order for there to be winners, there must be losers. Clearly, everyone can grow. Clearly, it is not a zero-sum game because remember, I showed you data back in the 1800s. Everyone was poor. If you needed to take from somebody to grow, who the hell were you taking from? How do we go from everyone being over here in this lower left-hand corner to large sections of as the world is growing, as the population is growing, now it's all over here, spread out, and everyone's wealthier. And yeah, by the way, that number was adjusted for inflation. Growth comes from people grow. Everyone can grow. You don't need to have a loser in order to have winners. Growth, like trade, is positive sum. Everyone can grow. I use the term game, by the way. It's just an economic turn of phrase. It doesn't mean that it's frivolous or fun. It's just a term we use from an area of economics and mathematics called game theory. Okay. Are we good so far? Any questions? Yeah.
So you say growth can have all but winners and no losers?
I mean, it's possible. In actuality, there will be losers in economic growth. Just like if you have some sort of technological improvement, there are going to be people made worse off by that improvement. But the whole idea is the sum part. If you take the benefits from the winners, you then X out the losses from the losers. You're still ahead. Case in point, we all used to be farmers. And then when we started developing better uses of farming and we invented the tractor, the people who were made worse off were people who raised horses. And we would not say, well, we're much more efficient at growing food and we can do all these other things now. But, X number of people lost their job because they can't raise horses anymore. I guess it's a wash, right? We wouldn't say that. Right? We would say clearly we are still on the whole better off. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a little more sense.
Okay. A little bit more sense.
I also say there's losers though.
Oh, I'm not saying there's not losers. Of course there are losers to growth, but that doesn't mean society as a whole loses. And so as economists, we care about society as a whole. We don't care about one particular group over others. We say, well, what is beneficial for society, for humanity as a group?
I understand.
So, okay, any other questions? That's a great question. All right. Let's do another one then. So, it's possible though, you see how poor society is, right? Some of those bottom billions, they're living off of $2, $3 a day. It's hard to imagine a lot of change that would happen. Thomas, what kind of change do you expect? What kind of economic growth, right? We did the economic growth rates, right? 3%, 4%, 2% growth rates of GDP. What kind of growth rate would you expect in order to have some sort of transformative change in your lifetime? Well, let's imagine there's a country where the average person makes, we'll say, $1,000 a year, which is very, very low. That's less than $3 a day. Do my math. Yeah, less than $3 a day. Imagine you would like to see that country be a lot wealthier. If I say, well, they're growing at 7%. So now it used to be 1,000. Now next year it's $1,000.07. Or I'm sorry, $1,070. If I tell you 7%, does that seem like a big deal? Not really, right? Not a huge difference at all. So when I say, oh, like, what kind of growth would you expect to get transformative change in your life? Give me a number. Because clearly you think 7% is pretty insufficient. 1,000. Right? That would be huge. Right? Of course, 1,000 is not achievable, right? And some people might say, well, okay, let's do something like 100, right? It has to double. But 100% growth rate is not achievable. 50% growth rate is not achievable. So it seems like, okay, fine, the world is getting wealthier, but we're not going to get any better in our lifetime. And here's the thing. It doesn't quite work that way. Because this 7% growth, it seems small when you look at from year to year. It's actually huge. This 7% growth rate can fuel transformative change in your lifetime. Transformative change in your life as time as possible. With that, we turn to the rule of 70. Has anyone ever heard of that? Sometimes it's called the rule of 72. Anyone heard of that? No. So it's a rule of thumb. It says, if you wanted to estimate how long it takes for some value to double, take 70 divided by the growth rate. That gives you a rough idea. About equal, right? The little squiggly mark means about equals the number of periods it takes. Because keep in mind, if this is 70, if this is an additional 7%, and we go 7% again, we're not adding 70 on. It's not going to be 1140. It's going to be 1140 plus the 70 that we got. Right? Whatever that number is. 490. And then it's going to grow from there. It's going to grow exponentially. It looks very small at first, but it becomes crazy. It's like that legend about, oh, I bet you can't eat 1 grain of rice a day, but every day I double the amount of rice. And then that continues for a whole month. So the first day it's 1 grain of rice, the second day it's 2 grains of rice, the third day it's 4 grains of rice. And you're like, of course I could do that. Anyone ever done this math before? Like by the end of the month, you're eating like giant truckloads of grains of rice. Like it's like more rice than ever existed, right? It's just like, it just grows at a crazy level that you don't see in the beginning, but it snowballs. If you take 70 divided by 7, what do you get? 10. In 10 years, this 1,000 becomes roughly 2,000. What year is it, 2025? If they keep going at 7%, they will have an average income of about $2,000. If you go at another 7% for another 10 years, it doubles again to 4,000. This is 10, 20, this is 30 years on, 8,000. 40 years on, 16,000. 50 years on, well within your lifetime. One would hope anyway. 32. People talk about the rise of China, which was clipping along at sometimes 10% real growth. That's adjusted for inflation. This is why you saw China zoom across. Transformative change in your lifetime is possible. Any questions? Let's do number 3. Okay, let me ask you a quick question. This number 3. Taylor, let's imagine you were to turn a gravel road into a paved road. What are the advantages of turning, or a dirt road? We'll say a dirt road into a paved road. What are the advantages of paved roads over dirt roads? Smoother. Okay. All right. So, what does that mean in practice? I mean, it's more pleasant to drive on, but you can also. What does it mean? A couple advantages of paved roads. Yeah.
Your tires.
Yeah, there's less wear and tear on vehicles, right? Absolutely. Your tires are in better shape. And as a result, you can
Go faster.
go faster. Right. Also, if there is a storm, what happens to the road? Yeah, right. It doesn't get all muddy and everything. You can still use it even in bad weather. So switching over to a paved road, hugely advantageous. If you were to pave a road that was not paved over in the United States, and they do exist, how much benefit do you think that would get? How big of a deal would it be?
Depends on where the road is in the United States.
Well, think about where are the unpaved roads in the United States?
Arkansas.
Arkansas. 350. Like actually, like it's unpaved.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the paved roads. Yeah, like 250, like around us, right? And unpaved roads are going to be like, well, you pick Arkansas, like, yeah, middle of the country. But yeah, rural areas. Arkansas has paved roads. I know what you mean. Rural parts of Arkansas. We have unpaved roads in Maryland.
There's unpaved roads everywhere.
There's unpaved roads everywhere, but where are they generally?
Places like Arkansas.
The whole state, places like Arkansas. it's just they barely have electricity there, right? Yeah. Rural areas, right? Low population areas. If you pave a road there, is it going to be a big deal to people?
No.
No, right? It'll be a big deal to people who live there, but it's not going to be a big deal to society. You pick the low-hanging fruit first. You start paving the roads. Then you're going to pave the roads that are nearby. Right? You pave the roads that everyone uses first. Now, imagine you pave a road in an underdeveloped country. In a country that's level 1, for example. Are a lot of roads in level 1 countries paved?
I know.
No. There are some, of course, right, especially in cities. But there's a lot that are often used that are not well paved. They're not paved at all. What kind of difference does that make if you pave a road in an undeveloped country? No, it's probably well used, right? A lot of roads are not paved. Here, even rarely used roads are paved in the United States. But in undeveloped countries, even commonly used roads will not be paved. Even commonly used roads will be dirt or gravel. Even commonly used roads will be awash during storms. Even commonly used roads has this issue of cars not being able to go very fast on them. You pave a road in an undeveloped country, you're going to get a huge improvement. In other words, and I'm going to give you the title in a moment, but there's diminishing marginal benefit to capital. Sometimes we call this returns, but it's essentially saying, look, in underdeveloped countries, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. If you keep adding capital to a country that's already well-developed, then it's hard for it to grow. It's hard for it to make really good use of it. But there's a lot of untapped potential in underdeveloped countries. There's a lot of well-used but unpaved roads in undeveloped countries. There's a lot of potential for adding electricity and making it more reliable. That's a huge deal if you can do that in undeveloped countries. There's a lot of potential. And therefore, diminishing marginal development poor countries can grow faster than rich countries. China had 10% growth for a long time. There's no way the United States could achieve 10%. That's really hard to imagine. China had a lot of low-hanging fruit it could pick. We do not. If poor countries grow faster than rich countries, what happens? If one country's up here, the other country's up here, and they're both growing, but one's growing faster, what happens?
The gap closes.
The gap closes. They converge. This is called convergence. We've seen this happen. South Korea used to be a really poor country. In the 50s, it was very poor. It grew incredibly fast. Now it's one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Japan after World War II, same story. Germany after World War II, same story. Many countries have grown incredibly fast. China, we're seeing it now. They kind of hit a little bit of a path for reasons we'll talk about. But this idea that rich countries can grow faster, that these seemingly low but actually quite high rates are achievable, that's also good news. Someone have any questions? You should have one, because I'm saying something really weird. I'm saying, hey, not only is growth possible for everybody, not only is transformative change possible in your lifetime, but it's inevitable. It's like, look, there's all these low-hanging fruits. If you're going to make an investment, make the investment in the poor countries, because you're going to get a much bigger bang for your buck. You're going to have a higher rate of return. So if growth is not only possible, but transformative change is likely and inevitable, there's a natural question. What's the natural question?
Why is poverty so good?
Yeah, well, what the fuck is going on then, right? Like, we have lots of poor countries. You saw them. There are a billion people on level 1. Why isn't everyone rich by now? What's going on? This leads us to the bad. Any questions before I erase this? I'm usually a little bit more interactive, but there's a lot to get to. And I want to make sure we have time. You can do whole classes on economic development. This is just us dipping our toes. The bad news is actually kind of good news. It's really just less good news. Because it used to be we had no idea why. They're just poor. That sucks. We don't know why. We used to think that, oh, I know, they just don't have enough education. And so we built schools. Economic development agencies would build schools and infrastructure because they want to keep advantage of this convergence issue. And then, like, no one would teach at the schools. Or the dams would not be well maintained. Or people would have electricity, but they wouldn't use it well. We now have a better idea of what causes growth. The idea is, the answer to this question, we need conditional convergence. When we think about in other words, convergence occurs if certain conditions are in play. Certain conditions are present. Once we have those conditions, we get economic growth. The bad part is it's hard to get those conditions. The good news is we have a pretty good idea what those conditions are. Okay. To get into what those conditions are, I actually want to show you something really neat. Oh, let's bring that down. I gave a lot of books today. This is the big day. This is a good day for lots of books. So this is going to come from Bernardo Soto's A Mystery of Capital. Bernardo Soto wanted to know, what is the deal with my country? He lived in Peru. And he's like, why is so many countries poor? So many countries are wealthy. My country's poor. What's going on? Why am I so screwed? So he kind of zoom in. said, well, you know what? We know for a fact that a big source of economic growth are people like developing useful legal businesses, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to start a legal business. I'm going to like here. There we go. So what this is this is the procedure to form a legally obtained home in Peru. Oh, this wasn't a business, but it's the same idea. It's a legally obtained home in Peru. Having a legal title to your home is a big deal. It means that you can borrow against it. It means you can sell it. If you have a business too, it's going to be the same story. You can expand it. You can get out a loan on its behalf. You can sell it to somebody else. It's an asset. If you have legal ownership of something, it unlocks all of these other potential things. So a lot of homes in Peru are not legally owned at the time of him doing this. So in order to get this home that somebody might have that's legal, he is the interested party, and he has to go to the reception of documents to be processed. They get some paperwork. And then they fill it out. And then they go back, they turn it in. And then they go to the documentary procedure of the General Office of Private Works for the Metropolitan Municipality of Lima. Right? Lima is the capital of Peru. Then you go up to the municipal office. Then you go back down to documentary procedures. Then you go to Management and Adjudication Office of the General Office of Private Works. Then you go to the Chief Office of Technical Control of the Adjudication Office of the General Office of Private Works. Then you go to Professional Technical Control. Then you go down to here to Urbanization Management. Then you go back up to the Professional Technical Control Adjudication Office, the General Office of Private Works. Then you go to the Chief Office, hello again. Then you go down to here to Management. And I guess you can just fail. But if you succeed, you get to go to the Valuation Exploration Office, which you could also then just fail. But if you succeed here, loop around back down to management, down to a different management, you get more documents to be processed, and then it just keeps going. Procedure to form a legally obtained house in Peru. The procedure consists of 5 stages. The first one, this is one of 5, consists of 207 steps. Why are countries so poor? What are the conditions? It's institutions. Does anyone know what an institution is? In economics, institutions are what we call the rules. It's not like think of a university as an institution. Here we think of it in terms of a set of rules as the institutions. Here, the rules are terrible. And it's, by the way, not just Peru, in case you're curious. He also does something, and this is procedure to formalize informal property in the Philippines. It will take 13 to 25 years. Zoom out a little bit, because it's all these different steps. Here is the procedure to gain access to desert land for construction purposes. It's the desert. I want to build something in the desert. Well, it's going to take you 6 to 14 years. I don't know if you can read it. It takes 6 to 14 years. Here is the procedure to obtain a sales contract following a 5-year lease contract in Haiti. It will take you 4,000 days. These are bad institutions. They prevent economic growth. So what we need, if we're going to talk about those conditions, we need, for the lack of a better word, good institutions. Again, I use the term the game. All right. So I'm going to be using the terminology that we just awarded last year, so Nobel Prizes in economics and economic development. And so I'm going to be using their terminology. That Darren S. Mobile uses terminology. It's like we need to draw a distinction between inclusive and extractive institutions. Inclusive institutions broadly distribute power, political power, political power. And economic opportunity. Extractive institutions are built around, essentially, as they imply, taking from the local society and giving them to a powerful elite. As a result, government is either ineffective or accountable to a very narrow group. These institutions make society wealthier. These institutions make society poor. Why do you suppose then countries establish exclusive institutions? Why do you suppose someone, because clearly somebody made these rules, want to make it so hard for people to, legally get a contract or legally obtain a house? Who would want that? Who would want to make it hard for people to start businesses? Yeah.
Maybe they want to stay in control.
Who? Who wants to stay in control?
Government?
The government and
Is it the people with already established businesses?
uh-huh.
They don't want competition.
Yeah. What does that sound like?
Like that puzzle that we do,
Uh-huh.
where like dentists didn't want them to have a like
Exactly. But yeah.
sorry, I think this does with a whole like
Oligarchy? Oligopoly?
yeah, something like that.
Sorry, someone was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, exactly. That's what we even talk about, like in some of these like countries like Ukraine and Russia, right? The oligarchs are people who control certain pockets of the economy, and a big source of their wealth is keeping out competition. So as Emily points out, it's like that Ed puzzle. It's like the stuff we did on public choice. It just turned up to 11. Anyone know the turn up to 11 phrase? This is Spinal Tap. It's a good movie. It's a bunch of it's a parody. It's like a joke documentary about these rock stars, and they're looking at different equipment, and one is like, "Well, this equipment's better." Like, why? Well, because the sound goes up to 11. You see the markers? It goes up to 11. This one only goes up to 10. So this one's better because the 11 is bigger. But we turn this up to 11 in these underdeveloped countries. And so they're designed to be complicated because if you have connections, you can get around the bureaucracy and you can legally establish a business. And now you're the only business that's legal. You're the only business that's allowed to advertise. You're the only business that can, make deals with the government, for example, get government contracts because you're a legal business. The other ones aren't. And you can sell, and you can go international. You can get funding, and you can get work with banks. It's extractive. It's preventing. It's giving only. It's narrowly defined economic opportunity. And it's hard to get rid of because if you were to say, hey, let's get rid of this giant bureaucracy, for one, people don't trust the government for good reason. Every time I go to the government, I have to go through this Kafkaesque maze to try to get economic development. And two, you're going to piss off powerful elites who do not want to make it hard. Sorry, who do not want to make it easy to compete, who want to make it hard to compete. It's very hard to dislodge this. It's pretty amazing we've ever dislodged this issue. A lot of the stuff I'm coming from, by the way, is this book, How the World Became Rich. I strongly recommend this book if you are curious about these issues. It's a recent book. It was published in the last couple of years. And it's a lot of the summary on the current state of how did we get from everyone being really poor, as you saw in the 1800s, to now some people being incredibly rich. Some groups, because some countries, some societies becoming incredibly rich. What's the history there? What's the main cause? And there's a big focus on these inclusive and extractive institutions. Because institutions are an amplification. Okay, so if there are no questions, I want to elaborate a little bit then. Are there any questions, comments? I need to check my time here. I can talk about this a lot. Okay, so let's do some important kinds of institutions. I can frame my freaking eraser. All this. Oh, there it is. Thank you. This way. So when we talk about what kind of institutions would we like to see, we're going to break them down into three large groups. One, most clearly, are economic institutions that are inclusive. What would be some good inclusive economic institutions? Let me give you some examples. Clear property rights. One of the problems of these undeveloped countries, it's not clear who owns what. Right? And if it is clear, it's not written down anywhere. It's not legally identified. Again, it makes it hard for you to borrow against and expand it and pass it on. Anyone else want to maybe add some things? Again, things will encourage competition. Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Banks.
Banks, yeah, oh yeah. We need a good banking system. I have I have a list in my notes, but it's not an exhaustive list. I'm going to also add. Yeah. And also, quite frankly, insurance, run insurance. Yeah, great.
Like regulations.
What do you mean?
Like I'm sure there are like some type of laws that prevents like a company, let's say that's dominant in the field from I don't know.
Some sort of like antitrust regulation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tricky. We can include that. It's tricky because sometimes those come about because of not good enough other things. But we can add antitrust regulation if you want. I'm iffy about it, but it's worth because it can come into lots of different forms that can be easily abused. So I'll add a question mark there, but I'd have to put it down. What about one that we've talked about before? Trade. You don't want to have lots of barriers to trade. You want to have flexible labor markets too, if you want to add that to the list. But this is what I like about the antitrust regulation and all these things. They all play into the idea of we're going to broadly distribute political power and opportunity, right? A lot of people have that opportunity. There are low barriers to entry. So another aspect of this is right, these kind of work together. Right? It's not explicit regulation, but as we talked about with the Ed puzzle, like if you create barriers to entry, you don't get a lot of competition. You're not broadly distributing economic opportunity. You don't. If you don't have competition, you don't have growth. Because it's too easy to take advantage. It's too easy to sit on your laurels. So those are some good economic institutions. Let's talk political institutions. Yeah, Grace. Yeah. Absolutely. You want to elaborate?
Like, or like sort of bribes from
Mhm.
institutions a law based on that.
Yeah. And so the literature of this is kind of funny because sometimes there's an argument out there that sometimes corruption is good because if it's corruption, they get around some sort of ridiculous rules. You can kind of cobble together some economic growth. But generally speaking, you're absolutely right. And in order to catch those people, in order to make it accountable, because you can have some anti-corruption laws, but maybe they're ignored. Maybe some free and fair elections. Right? We need to keep the government accountable. Oh, let's also add rule of law. Everyone's subject to the law. Oh, let's also add some government transparency too. Because if people don't know what's happening, then they can't actually keep people accountable. I think most of these are in my notes. Oh. And you have to be able to protest the government, so we're going to need some free speech. Freedom of assembly. In other words, just make a list of things dictators hate and add it to the list. If you have one of these and not the other, then the other one isn't going to last for very long and not going to be very effective. You kind of need both of these. And also nice if you had some cultural ones too. It's not enough to have a rule of law on paper. People also have to have an expectation of a rule of law. One of the main barriers that India has to deal with is still very much the caste system is still very entrenched there culturally. Not everywhere, of course. It's better than it was, say, 100 years ago, but it's still there. And that's a huge problem. Trust is really important too. You have to trust strangers. So let's harp on this a little bit. Yeah, I got a little bit. In an underdeveloped country, imagine you are able to form a business. And maybe it's some sort of basket weaving business. And you sell these baskets to locals, but you would like to expand. They're good baskets, they're handmade, your labor is pretty cheap because you're in an undeveloped country. And maybe like, you know what, I bet I could sell these baskets in other countries. I bet I could sell. What kind of help would you need? What kind of people would you like if you want to expand your business? Name me some jobs. Yeah.
Something with marketing?
Some marketing, right? Some sort of marketing professional, let people know about it. Absolutely.
Investors.
Investors? Yeah, you would like to have someone to bring in some money, right, to get you the capital. Absolutely, yeah. Accountants, yeah, or you have someone to keep track of this money, right? Now, think about if you have low levels of trust in your society, and it's hard to, you know, the court system is a bit iffy and everything. Plus, even if the court system works well, it's expensive to go to court. It would be nice if you had some reasonable expectation that you could trust people. But if you have low expectations, you can trust people. You are not going to necessarily work with an investor who might take advantage of you. You are not necessarily going to hire strangers who have the accounting skills you need or the marketing skills you need. You're going to focus on the people who you can inherently trust, which typically mean you're going to focus on who? Friends and family. Now think of your friends and family. Do you have someone who's an excellent accountant in your family? Do you have someone who's really great at marketing? Do you have someone who maybe can navigate sort of like tariffs and trade regulation in order to export from other countries? No, probably not. And so we see this over and over in undeveloped countries. And if you're from an undeveloped country, you might have first-hand experience with this. There's a lot of small family businesses that say small because they don't have the trust or the institutional infrastructure necessary to expound outward to people who actually have the skill of the business. And it keeps countries stuck. it keeps them stuck, and they can't develop the conditions necessary in order to catch up. And it's very hard to unstick this. In sub-Saharan Africa, for example, countries that were most exposed to the slave trade still have lower levels of trust than countries that were less exposed. And that creates permanent problems that we're experiencing centuries. That we're dealing with centuries. Okay. Last thing, if you don't have any questions, I have one more thing for you. If you no more questions. Great. Cover more of this. Again, you don't want to have the government to be too weak, because like then the society falls apart. So the Nobelists, I should indicate the Nobel Prize laureates now, but they call this the narrow corridor to liberty. I have a nice little link there. But I want to talk about the resource first, and then we'll be done. Because when I sometimes talk about like what makes countries wealthy, some people will say, "Oh, if you have lots of resources, it's really good," and it's like, not necessarily. Because there are countries that are not so good, even though they have natural resources. Does anyone know what the resource curse is? Yeah, Grace?
So like if you have a lot of resources, like other countries would wanna take them?
Not necessarily. I mean, you're right, it has a lot to do with resources. It isn't necessarily something that people might try to steal them from abroad. I'm sorry, what? They might make good use of it, right? Well, what do you mean by make good use of it? Uh-huh. And so they, I say they don't try to export it? Or
Yeah, like try to use the original.
yeah, yeah. But what makes it a curse is that they're not using it as well as they could?
Yeah, because they still have like kind of like some formulas.
Yes. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, yes, yeah. Broadly distributed, maybe, right? Broadly distributed. Yeah, yeah.
I was gonna say, people who are like in control, kind of like coordinated.
Yeah. I like what you're going with that.
Yeah.
Like, as you points out, yeah. Coordinate.
Resources they get for their own selfish
Mhm.
as opposed to like helping the entire.
Exactly. Right. The resource curse explicitly is about why are there countries that have lots of resources but still poor. And it's not like having natural resources is inherently bad. The United States has tons of coal. We're not poorer because of it. Okay. We're richer because of it. But some countries have lots of natural resources and they seem to be poorer because of it. What the hell's going on? It's yeah. It's corruption. It's
The way they allocate.
uh-huh.
It's yeah. You know how to use it. For example, I come from a country we have many resources, but sometimes we sell it at such a low price, we don't see the money.
What do you mean by we? Who's we?
Well, the government.
The government doesn't see. Well, but so that's going to be there's lots of different explanations for the resource curse. So sometimes called Dutch disease, where you like invest so much in extracting that resource, your entire economy is subject to the ebbs and flows of that market. And then there's issues with like the currency exchange rate and everything. And so that's one explanation of it. But the explanation I want to focus on, my little bit of time I have left, dovetails very nicely with these issues. So if you want to be a dictator, and this theory, by the way, comes from the Dictator's Handbook, which is another book I recommend. If you want to be a dictator, you need money to pay off the various people that you help keep you in power, right? Dictators are not true dictators where they're not accountable to anyone. They're just accountable to a small group of people, some elites. So you need to get people to create some rudimentary businesses and generate some rudimentary wealth that you can take it and then pass over. The problem is generating rudimentary businesses involves giving them access to electricity and paving some roads and letting them learn how to read, which is annoying from your perspective because that means that they can travel to different places and protest you. And if they're reading, that means they can read how corrupt you are. And that's really annoying. If I want to be a dictator, I don't want people to be able to overthrow me or even get even a bit of tools. But I have to give them a little bit of tools because I want them to generate wealth that I can take so that I'm not overthrown by the military. Shit. But you know what I could do? If I have oil in my country, I could just pay off a small group of people to extract the oil and then sell it abroad. And the oil generates so much money in and by itself, I can just fuck everyone else off, get the oil, get the money, pay off the military, and I'm set. And that's the resource curve. Because these natural resources, they really amplify. If you have inclusive institutions, then natural resources are a huge boon. You can use those resources, you can then spend labor, capital, do other things, and it amplifies how wealthy you are. But if you have fundamentally bad institutions, then it's going to make those institutions worse. And you're not going to bother educating people. Somebody from one of these countries, when I mentioned this, they were like, oh, because he was wondering why in 5th grade they stopped teaching him new things. And they just kept talking about the same thing over and over again. It's because they didn't actually want them to learn. Because the more you learn, the more empowered you become to overthrow the elites. Remember? Importance of free and fair elections, importance of government transparency, the importance of free speech. All of those are really great for broadly distributed political power, which is exactly what powerful people do not want. Is this the only theory of the resource curve? No. But it's pretty damn compelling as far as I'm concerned. Any questions? Are you depressed yet? You might be, but keep in mind, and we'll close on this, yes, the world is still poor, but the world, despite all things, is getting richer. So try to be optimistic, just cautiously so. In case you're curious, this lecture was drawn on largely, as I mentioned, how the world became rich, a lovely summary of the current state of the research on this, but I also drew from Bruce Mesquita and Alistair Smith's, Smith's Dictator's Handbook. If you're curious about that. Fernando de Soto's Mystery of Capital that you saw. Factfulness by Hans Rosling. And I didn't get to this, but in case you're curious, you might have heard of this one, Guns, Germs, and Steel, which is about the terrain and the geography and how that impacts economic development by Jared Diamond. So this area is a huge area of economics. It's our most important area. It's a shame I really only have time for one class on it. You can do one lecture on it. You can do whole classes on this. You can do fields on this. This is a big area. Win Nobel Prizes for this work. But if you're curious about any of these, you're welcome to borrow them. And I hope you have a great couple of days. I will see you on Thursday.